I invited the customers, predominantly ladies who were coming out of the supermarket, can I push your trolley to your car and help you? So after about 2 or 3 weeks of doing this in the school holidays, I got a request by the manager of the supermarket, young man, you can't continue doing this. And I said, why can't I? Because there's a liability issue we have here. Our insurance. So someone has gone to that level, and ever since I've been so liability conscious in everything in my life.
Hello and welcome to another Tales from the Trenches podcast, in which we talk to people with a deep engagement in the legal profession in Australia. My name's Tony Burke. I've been a lawyer in Melbourne, Australia for more than 40 years. Along the way, I was president of my state's law society with over 8,000 members, and I also served for 2 years as a director of the Law Council of Australia, which is Australia's peak body for the legal profession. Through that role, I was appointed as the inaugural chair of the Law Council's SME Business Law Committee, which was involved in making submissions to the federal government on SME related issues. And in that capacity, I was privileged to be called upon to give expert evidence to Australia's Senate. This podcast is brought to you by SBA, better known as Strategic Business Alliance Proprietary Limited, which is now Australia's biggest legal service outsourcer with a team of about 100 people spread between Australia and India. And I'm told that I was the first ever Australian lawyer to use that company for legal outsourcing, which makes me sort of famous. Today I'm talking with my old friend Alan Wein, who amongst other accomplishments was several years ago awarded the Order of Australia, a great honour. Alan's a lawyer of sorts, but he's much more. He's far from conventional, but powerfully effective, as we shall hear. You could call Alan a lawyer, but he's far more than that. You see, Alan's famous for getting it done. And today we shall hear about that it. So Alan, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Tony, and great to see you, and great to see you looking well. And you might be marking me up, but I think the legal sector in Victorian Australia owes you also a massive debt of gratitude for your contribution, and you should never undersell yourself, Tony. Other people do that. Never undersell yourself. So great to be able to participate, and I think this fantastic program that you're putting together, and congratulations to you.
Thank you. That's very graceful. Thank you. Now, as I mentioned, Alan, you've got an Order of Australia. I know this because I had the very great privilege of nominating you, and I drew upon observations of you at close quarters over a number of years, and I actually did some research about you, so I know where all the bodies are buried and where the dirt is. But take it as
there's no bodies.
Well, we can take it as given that, Alan, you've done great community service and you have very deep connections in the community, but you don't get an Order of Australia without that. So there has to be more. And today we're focusing on senior lawyers and what we have heard, so that's my focus today, and it's your involvement in and around the legal profession that I'm closely focused on. Now, Alan, each of us is a product of our background. You have a rich and varied background. Tell us a little about it.
A little bit of the DNA. Both my parents were Holocaust survivor parents. And
Right.
your comment before about we're all a product of our own history and DNA, there's nothing truer than that in my view. And both my parents were very different people. Both my parents regrettably had a bad marriage and had a number of separations before they got divorced. But, not that I intervened in that dispute, as while I started a master's degree and unfortunately chose family law to do it in, I didn't finish the master's because it was probably the wrong thing for me to do as a family law stream. I should have probably done trusts or property or some other more relevant thing. But the point about the history of my parents is that I think I got a lot of above the neck thinking and attitudes that I learnt indirectly and probably directly from my father. My late father was a person that I would describe as nothing worried my father. My father was in Siberia at the beginning of the war and then in Germany at the end of the war and had obviously a very tough time of it. But my dad's instincts of survival and his attitude of being positive, nothing would get on top of him, continued after the war when he was a refugee that then came to Australia without family, because they all got exterminated, came without language, came without money, came with a suitcase, a small suitcase. I remember him telling, my father's been gone over 20 years. My father came with a suitcase. I said, Dad, what did you have in that suitcase? And he said, nothing. I said, well, why did you have a suitcase? And he said, I came with the hope of filling it up. So that was my dad. And
What was your father's occupation, Alan?
My father was a tailor and a fashion. He made fashions for what at the time was called after five ladies' wear. So gowns and suits and all of those sorts of things. And I think my dad could have turned his hand technically to a lot of things, but that's what his expertise was in. And my father always rattled on to my sister and myself about the fact that he couldn't finish an education and he was determined that his children would have the opportunity that he had missed out on, and always had a focus for me to become a lawyer. It was an interesting story that led to that, and I'll share it with you. My father had a commission from a client to make some garments, some suits for them, and I think I would have been probably about 8, 9, 10 or 11. I can't remember exactly. But my father had to deliver the garments to the customer. And the customer's husband was an eminent QC at the time. And my dad said, come with me. So and my recollection was, and I'm not sure whether it was a gal bully but that's vaguely what was in my head. So I think my dad took me along perhaps with an ulterior motive, I don't know. So my father and I went to this client, I think it was in Brighton, that's again vague recollection, and my father introduced me to his client, a lady, and then the husband came out, who was this eminent QC. And he sat down, we had afternoon tea, and
Really?
he said to me, "What do you want to be?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to be a lawyer. I love what you do." And this barrister gave me a book which I treasured. It was called Defenders, I'll never forget it, Defenders Triumph, by a writer called Edgar Lusgarten, who was a British, I think he was a British journalist and lawyer as well, and wrote these short stories, detective stories. And this barrister gave me that book. I read it cover to cover maybe 3 or 4 times, and I was sold. That was it. I was going to be a lawyer.
The curse was upon you.
Exactly, early on.
Well, he probably transformed your life at a moment in time when you were very susceptible to influence. That was a fascinating experience.
Yeah, I'm not sure how susceptible I was, but you know, I'm one of these people, and I think I've always been fairly that way. I'm a searcher. I'm looking for things that interest and motivate me. I was absolutely hopeless. I had the acclaim of getting an F for woodwork at I think it was first or second year in high school. I don't know what year that is now, probably 7 or 8. And I got an F for it, and I deserved at least an F for it, but I did better in the more academic subjects, so it was, a trade was never going to be my skill set. It was to probably, hopefully, find something cerebral that I could get into. So
where did you go to school, Alan?
I started primary school all the way through Deakin State School, which was a very highly regarded state school in Kew. From there, my parents weren't in a position to send me to private school. They were comfortable, but just comfortable, so I went to Kew High School all the way through, which also had a very good academic reputation at the time as one of the elite state high schools. I enjoyed it. It was, at the time, very multicultural, which was also good. I enjoyed that interaction, and from there went to law school.
It must have been a lot of post-war migration at that time. When you look back on those years in secondary school, is there any part of it that stayed with you that has transformed you in your later life? A lot of people say no, but
yeah. Look, the main thing that has probably remained with me was that there were 2 things, and I'll be candid with it. There was a little bit of anti-Semitism that I experienced, and that was reasonably tough. But also the multicultural side of things. Lots of Greek, Italian kids. There weren't a lot of Asian kids at that stage of time.
No.
That was a little bit later, but it would have been great. But mixing with kids of perhaps European immigrant backgrounds was, I think, really important and remained with me.
And you said that you went from Kew High School to the University of Melbourne. How did things go at university?
Look, university was a different experience because you were very much to your own devices. If you went to toots, you went to toots. If you didn't, no one cared. If you went to lectures, same thing. It was a very self-motivating and self-instructive environment, as opposed to high school and primary school, where things were more directed towards you. That didn't worry me. I was fairly self-motivated and self-sufficient, and uni life, even though I didn't stay there for a long period of time in terms, stay for my lectures and then left, I was working a lot of part-time jobs in order to financially sustain myself during my uni years, and but I enjoyed uni. I enjoyed walking through the musty smells of the old law library, as it was at the time. We've now got that new law building in Grattan Street, and but in the old days, you know, just smelling the history of that building.
It had character, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Now, it sounds like you had a fairly cost-benefit approach to the study of law, with the consequence that you probably freed up a bit of time. And I'm picking up that you got out of the university campus and got into business in some degree. Tell us about that.
Again, a product of need and opportunity at the same time. At a particular stage where my parents went through their final separation, then divorced, I thought it would be, and I didn't take sides, you know, and I don't think we were too, like people say, oh, you know, children of you know, divorced people early in life and whatever have emotional issues, and some do, but I think it's very much an individual thing. You take out of what you take out of it. For me, I decided at that time it would be right for me to leave home. I was starting my year of articles, and I thought it's the right time for me to go. My parents are doing their own thing, and what happens is that when you leave home, you incur expenses. There's rent, there's car, there's food, there's what, you know, and you want to have a bit of a social life. So I started serving the process writs and summonses and affidavits for the firm that I was at. And then I expanded it to the firms in the local area, and then I started expanding it to city firms, and my business partner, who was also a lawyer at the time working in the city, I said to him after I'd started doing this for about 6 months, come and join me and let's build this up to an even bigger business. So it was called Dynamic Process Services at the time, and we...
Who was your friend?
Bradley Wein. Bradley Wein.
Sounds like your twin brother.
No relation. We kind of say to each other that we're brothers with different mothers and fathers. So we built up quite a substantial process serving business. We then expanded out into insurance investigation work, which was probably, when you look back 40 years ago, or over 40 years ago, insurance matters had to be dealt with. People slipping up on cabbage leaves in retail premises, supermarkets, department stores. They all had to be investigated, and they had to be quantified or assessed on a liability basis before they went to the next stage. Here were two budding lawyers doing or having our contractors do the legwork, and we were then giving a quasi-assessment to the underwriter as to, we think this is a matter that's worth contesting or a matter that's worth resolving. And they were wrapped with that kind of scenario 45 years ago, and we did very well out of it. So that was the first entrepreneurial endeavour. Apart from my entrepreneurial endeavour when I was 11 years of age, you'll find this quite funny, Tony. Very eager to generate enough funds to get that packet of fish and chips with a couple of extra dim sims thrown in. You needed a little bit more money. So what did I do as an 11-year-old? I went up to the local supermarket. If you know the area, it was, I think, a Dickens at the time, not a Safeway or a Coles, on the corner of Burke Road, Doncaster Road and High Street in Kew. There was that massive intersection, and there was a supermarket on the corner. So I trotted up there during the school holidays, and I invited the customers, predominantly ladies who were coming out of the supermarket, can I push your trolley to your car and help you? So I did that, and I might have got a 20-cent piece or a 50-cent coin if I was lucky enough for the effort. You know, I didn't say it's going to cost them anything, but, you know, I gave them the puppy dog eyes, and, you know, they might have rewarded me for my efforts. And so after about 2 or 3 weeks of doing this in the school holidays, I got a request by the manager of the supermarket. Listen, young man, you know, and I was 11 at the time. Young man, you can't continue doing this. And I said, why can't I? And he made his first representation to me that I understood, because there's a liability issue we have here. Our insurance... So someone has gone to that level, and ever since I've been so liability conscious in everything in my life and my kids' lives, and so despite his protestations, I continued it on for another couple of weeks, and then he said, look, I admire what you're doing. I'd like to give you a job, but you're too young to load shelves or work in the shop, because I think you had to be 14 or 15 in order to work. He politely said, you can't continue doing this. So that was my first entrepreneurial endeavour.
And you're still bearing the indignity of that decades and decades later.
Well, I don't know if it's an indignity, but it was a lesson that, it was my first lesson about liability and insurance.
Sure.
So when I think I had Harold Luntz in insurance at Melbourne Uni, I was already well informed as to what the consequences of adverse liability situations are.
Now, coming back to dynamic business services, which I think you probably kicked off when you're about 25, 26 or something like that.
Correct. Well, it would be before that. That would have started in my year of articles, so it would have been 21, 22, yeah. Wow.
Well, how long did you and Bradley Wein keep going with the business?
We ran that business, and we were serving process throughout the whole country, not only Victoria.
Wow.
We had agents in different geographies around the country, and we had quite a strong reputation amongst a lot of the large firms. Mm-hmm. And we got an offer to buy our business when I think I was 25 or just about to be 26, which was quite opportune because both Bradley and I were looking for the next big thing to get ourselves into. And
Not law. Not
yeah,
law.
out, outside the law, but still
Right.
having a finger in the law, if you know what I mean. So we were both looking together, and then we were looking separately. And I had a light bulb moment. I can't describe it better than that, and it is a bit of a thing that people say, oh, that people have light bulb moments. This was really a light bulb moment for me, where I foresaw that there was a franchise opportunity, and franchising was very nascent in Australia. It was predominantly only fast food, your McDonald's, your KFCs, those sorts of franchise operations. But I saw an opportunity where my wife and her mother had come back from shopping and they were in the next room, and I was uber sensitive to any opportunity because I wanted to go to the next level, but I didn't know what that would be. And they mentioned a wonderful gift and homeware store that they'd been to in Lygon Street, Carlton, and so I knew nothing about retail and nothing certainly about homewares, and I had a look at the shop that they were speaking about. It was called House, and it was a wonderful concept, but I perceived it more as a gallery type concept, even though it had all the homewares you'd expect: glassware, cookware, kitchenware, dinnerware, etc., and giftware. And I thought, now, this would be a fantastic concept if it could be adapted into a wider market across Australia for a franchise concept. And so one thing led to another, and we approached the owners of, they had two. And
We being you and Bradley.
well, I approached them first, and then I said to Bradley, have you found anything? I think I've found something I like. It would have been too big for me to go in as 100%. And Bradley and I were very much and continue to be joined at the hip in a lot of things. And he had a look at it and he said, yeah, let's give it a go. And so I made an approach to the owners, and one thing led to another. We ended up buying it. It had a wholesale importing business attached to it, and we ended up getting into the giftware and homeware business and expanded it across Australia.
Meanwhile, you're moving slowly further and further away from law. What was your father's reaction to all this? He was still alive, wasn't he, at that
He
point?
was. It's a very good pickup, actually. The best way I can characterise it is this, that my parents were obviously divorced, well divorced by then, and living separately, and I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I've found a business that I'm going into, and he says, what is it? Why aren't you leaving the law? Because my dad had this belief that if I stayed in the law, I should go to the bar, and you've studied all of this stuff, you're good at the law. So I said, Dad, we're going to homewares. And he looked at me and he was apoplectic and started going off. how can you leave the... I said, look, I'm not leaving the law, I'm just doing something different. I'm not throwing away my shingle and my certificate and continuing on, but this is something I want to do that I think could be very interesting and very productive. And he was apoplectic. He couldn't understand it. He was disappointed and miffed by how I could make such, in his view, an unwise decision.
Was he predicting failure?
Well, no, not predicting failure. I think failure, wasn't a word that my father or I had in our dictionaries. It was more disappointment of giving away, in his view, giving away a good tertiary degree, an opportunity, because he thought, and others around him who were lawyers, friends of his, thought that I should be going to the bar, but I chose not to. The corollary to the story, though, Tony, is this: that when we'd opened up our 10th store a couple of years later, I went over to my dad, as I did several times a week, and I said, "Dad, we've opened up our 10th store." And he slaps me on the back and says, "I knew you made the right decision." It was quite typical of my dad. So,
from your legal and your mediation background, you would know that lots of lawyers and lots of accountants who jump the desk and decide to become entrepreneurial crash and burn. So what was the secret of your success?
Bradley and I went to law school together. We were best friends and continue to be best friends. We went into business together. We're very different type of people, different personalities, but we love each other like brothers, and we trust each other implicitly. We come perhaps with different skills and different abilities, as well as different personalities, and one and one made three with us. You know, we sometimes had different views of how we should go about in the business, but those views were articulated, discussed. We had lunch, we moved on, you know, and we continue to be partners in other things today, and still be best friends. And
okay.
It's an interesting case study. It's an interesting case study.
Okay, so it wasn't a partnership bust up that caused you to leave house. What was that? What happened?
Well, ultimately it was an offer that we couldn't refuse, even though certain members of my family were very upset. And, you know, this is going back couple of decades nearly, but several members of my family, immediate family, children and wife, were upset because my eldest daughter thought that she would ultimately sit in my seat as chairman and head buyer and doing what I was doing and sipping coffees in Lygon Street and going overseas several times a year. She thought that would be her role. My son thought that he would have a role. My wife thought that her role in the business, she ran the commercial hospitality side. And it was not an easy decision for us to make, to sell it, because we loved the business. The family was involved, our immediate family, no external family, were involved, and it was a fun, successful, enjoyable business that I was really 24/7 involved, always working, even though I was home at 5 o'clock every day to have dinner with the kids, do the sporting activities and do the homework with the kids when they were of that age, and then started again. I might, you know, after the kids went to bed, from 8 to 12 or 1, I'd be working again and loving it and loving every moment of it. So, you know, for me, it reinforced that if you've got the opportunity to do something you enjoy, do it. But if you don't, try and move to something you do enjoy doing.
Sure. Well, let's move on a bit. Alan, you don't, I believe, receive an Order of Australia for retailing, so there must be more to the tale. What did you do next?
My involvement in business and in franchising opened up a lot of doors for me in a wider sense. Jack Smorgan, who you probably have heard of, Jack Smorgan was the chair of Committee of Melbourne, and I can't remember what year it was, but Jack invited me to come on to the Committee for Melbourne, and I'll never forget his gracious offer. Said, you've got a lot to offer, and the Committee for Melbourne at the time was very active and probably still is. I don't know much of what it does now, but at the time, certainly with Jack, things were put to government in terms of policy and other institutions, and so a couple of years after I was involved with the Committee for Melbourne, I got a phone call from the Premier's office and the Small Business Minister's office to come into Parliament and they'd like to have a word with me. So I was curious. I don't think I'd done anything wrong, but just in case I was going to get lynched.
An invitation you don't refuse.
So yes, Marsha Thompson and Steve Bracks at the time were, Steve Bracks was Premier, Marsha was an outstanding small business minister for the state, invited me to become the inaugural chair of the Small Business Advisory Council, which provided direct feedback into small business policy existing and what we thought. We had to put a council together, and it was run through government and under the auspices of Premier and Cabinet as a Premier and Cabinet involvement. And I've got to say, the government was very responsive and very proactive in putting together some of the recommendations that I and my council recommended, one of which was the establishment of a small business commission in Victoria. And
very significant.
And it was hugely important because the voice of small business, whether it be through retailing, through business to government transactions, really didn't have a strong advocacy voice or a strong dispute resolution mechanism in this state.
Yes.
You either went to court or you did nothing, you suffered with the problem not being resolved. And the Small Business Commission Act was passed in 2003. The inaugural commissioner...
the first in the country, wasn't it, Alan?
It was the first in the country, and it was a recommendation that we put to the government that it should exist in one form or another, and the government were very responsive in that regard. Mark Brennan was appointed as the first Small Business Commissioner in Victoria, an outstanding appointment, and Mark was brilliant in how he developed the commission. There was a statute that provided some ground-based guidelines, but fundamentally Mark had to construct how the dispute resolution mechanism operated, how the advocacy roles were going to be fulfilled, and he did so in a brilliant way. And I knew Mark. We saw each other at I think a Premier's lunch or something to that regard, and Mark said to me, I've got to put together a dispute resolution function that the Act provides. Would I be willing and prepared to give some part-time assistance towards doing that? So I said to him, yes. It's often my response to a cry for help, yes. And so that's how my mediation, grounding in a formal sense, came into place. And there were hundreds and hundreds of disputes in those nascent days that came about.
Where did you do your mediation training?
I did the mediation course with Tanya Sorden's group.
Oh, yes.
Going
Yes.
back.
Yes.
I don't know whether it was Bond or Monash or
I think she was with Bond at that stage.
that
She
were
was very
doing
good.
it. I remember where it was. It was at an intensive course in the city in Melbourne, and you were then tested and accredited, and I thought it was outstanding. But it's interesting that the course gives you a textbook toolbox of skills and guidelines, but
Yes.
you need more than that. And I've written quite extensively on mediation practice and mediation skills, and you need to have a wider set of skills in order to become a really good mediator, rather than simply use a toolbox. You need to apply a lot of other things in that discipline.
What was the key learning that came through from your mediation training and your early involvement in mediation?
Yeah, really good question as well. Experience over probably nearly 25 years of mediation has 20 plus years has taught me that don't go in with any assumptions. You know, I've been involved, as you know, with a lot of complex litigations at high level. And you get a whole court book of material, and both sides articulate positions, and that's what they are. But experience has taught me not to get bogged down in the court book material. It's what's in the narrative with the parties that
Yes.
are most important. And one really good example, and it was a watershed moment for me. I was engaged in I think it was a Supreme Court or Federal Court matter to mediate, and my office got rung up. My secretary took the phone call and they said, Mr. Wein's conducting this mediation in this matter, and we have some material for Mr. Wein. And so my secretary said, fine, send it to the office. No, well, we have to tell you there's 10 trolleys, you know, the trolleys that are wheeled across William Street, you know, 10 trolleys of court book material.
How ridiculous.
My secretary pragmatically said, I'll speak to Alan and find out what he wants to do. So I said, not that I'm a greenie, but I do believe in preserving trees. Don't print and send me the stuff. I'll come and I'll read the material in your office, right? I did. So after 1.5 days of going through the material in their office, I elicited 14 key issues. 14 issues, right? So 14 issues, of which probably 10 of them were self-serving issues of not great consequence. But, you know, there's a lot of trolleys there. We got to mediation. I've got silks on both sides. You know, mediation was a big event for such a matter. And we sat down. I normally had the parties next to me, not their legal counsel. I wanted the parties next to me. Within 10 minutes of us sitting down, before formally commencing the mediation, the two parties were quite friendly, you know, even though they were in litigation, they were quite friendly. And they were talking to each other, and I could say, what's going on here? And they said, look, if you'd only have done that, and I would do this, and if you'd only done that, we wouldn't be in this situation. I said, bang. So I said, gentlemen, and there were two guys there, who were the parties. I said, what I'm listening to, this is before we even really got started. What's really at issue here? And for them, those 14 issues, there was only two of them that were relevant, and they had an opportunity to talk about them. So virtually wrapped up the mediation within a couple of hours of actually talking about what was the problem. So for me, it was a watershed moment, you know, make no assumptions, get the parties engaged in the narrative, because a lot of mediations don't involve a fundamental new issue of the law to be determined. They're pretty basic things.
Of course.
And also a lot of litigation, as we know, is a cry for help. You know, most of the retail leasing stuff, particularly over the COVID period, was cry for help. You know, can't pay the rent, can't pay the outgoings, even though there's relief, blah, blah, blah. It's cry for help. Get people together, talk about those issues, you know? That's what's important. So that was a real fundamental. So for me, in my mediation practice, I enjoy the chaos. I like order. I like people to be respectful, but I like the chaos to then filter through, so I can then get a sense of what buttons I need to press in order to get to resolution. Call out rubbish through properly articulated reality checking. Rubbish is rubbish, but you can't call it rubbish, obviously, because you don't want to offend people, but you need to get to the core issues of what's in dispute and then press the buttons of how to get to a resolution of that dispute.
The mediation work through the Small Business Commissioner is not well paid, so why did you do it?
That's a very interesting point. Well, we'd sold our business at that point, and not everything you do that you enjoy in life you need to get paid for, but and paid appropriately for. I thought that it was such an important policy decision and the right decision for a small business commission to function properly that it was important I'm not really wanting to use the word sacrifice, but to subsidise whatever fee that I would be able to generate, if I'd be retained privately to do a mediation, which would be significantly more, to provide a subsidised, professional, high-level service for the state. And I think there's a ulterior motive there, and that was the motivation. And I think a lot of the panel mediators who have been and gone through the Small Business Commission and some of the other panels, the franchise mediation panel, which I'll talk about in a minute as well, they're subsidised as well. Mediators who are, highly expert at what they do, provide expert services at a fraction of the fee that they would get if privately retained. And so there is, I think, a element of giving something back in order to provide a benefit to other people publicly.
Thank you. Alan, you mentioned earlier that you were involved in a consultancy role with the Victorian government that culminated in various things, including the advent of the Small Business Commissioner, which gradually found its way around the country. It's a matter of public record that in 2013 the federal government came along and appointed you to review the Franchising Code of Conduct, which is an industry code with a national reach. That could have been a poison chalice. How did that gig go?
Yeah, when I got the call from the Victorian government to do the Small Business Advisory Chair role, I had some nervousness why I'm getting a call from a government department. How do you think I felt when I got one from a federal government minister's office? So they invited me to conduct the review of the franchise code and legislation and regulatory requirements in 2013, believing that I had the requisite experience in franchising, legal experience, and business experience as well. And it was something that I had to reflect upon, whether I wanted to give that amount of time and effort to it. But again, I couldn't say no, and it was an incredible experience. The small business ministers, it was an appointment through Treasury and the Small Business Ministers office, and I was supported by a really wonderful secretariat, and I had to go all around the country taking consultations in a very lobbied sector, as you know. Franchisees and franchisors have very binary, polarised views of how the law and regulation in this space should go. And it was a very interesting intellectual challenge and a very interesting political dynamic that I was involved in. I met some incredibly wonderful people and some very challenging people at times as well, wanting me to make recommendations which were ones that I had to think clearly about. I was backing up in Canberra on a frequent basis, even though I wasn't going to move to Canberra to do it. I didn't want to give up my mediation practice. We probably had some mediations during the time that I was conducting the review, because I didn't want to have my hand out of what I would be doing once the review had finished. And the other interesting challenge I had was that there was a change of government at the time. The government had changed and Bruce Bilson became the Small Business Small Business Minister. And Bruce was outstanding in his knowledge and appreciation of the needs of small business. I found him, and I think he found me, very engaging in the task that I was given to do. And when the government had changed, and I can't remember the exact year, but when the government had changed, I had to go back up to Canberra to speak with everyone again about what my proposed recommendations would be, but this time it was to a different government. And Bruce was really appreciative and very intellectually engaged in the task that I had to do, and very supportive of the recommendations that I've made. I think all but one recommendation, I think, was in the main accepted in that review. We're currently going through another review of the franchise code, which Michael Shaper's doing at the moment. And
yes.
An outstanding appointment to review the current code. He's got some big challenges with regard to changes in the motor dealer sector, and there's some recent cases that have been involved there, and with the question about property rights and goodwill, etc., etc. So it's an evolving sector.
Alan, isn't it the case that there was effectively bipartisan support for your recommendations to be adopted?
Absolutely.
Which is unheard of.
Yeah, there were. And I thought that my engagement, and I had to engage directly with ministers and shadow ministers on both sides, and members of the crossbench as well, and that engagement enabled me to articulate the thinking that I had about some very tough issues that had to be contemplated and had to be considered in the recommendations that I finally made.
Right. You must have impressed someone, because you got another go round 2 years later, didn't you? There was another federal government review.
Yeah, I think Bruce must have liked me a fair bit, and also I think Barnaby Joyce was also involved. There was a requirement for the horticulture code, which existed at the time, to be reviewed as required under its mandate. And I clearly remember having a meeting with Bruce and Barnaby at the time, saying, are you really wanting me to do a review about horticulture? My level of competence is, I love avocados and I hate Brussels sprouts, and anything in the middle is very problematic. Where do I add my value, is what I asked them. And they said, your experience and knowledge and understanding of regulatory frameworks is critical. And they appointed a co-reviewer with me, lovely guy called Mark Napper, who had lots of hort experience, but not a lawyer, and not a lot of... we complemented each other, whereas I understood the regulatory format and dealt with recommendations accordingly, and Mark dealt with more of the fruit and veg side of things, because we had to deal with the wholesale markets, and again, consultation reviews throughout the country, and it was a very, very different type of sector than the franchising sector, which I knew intimately, but a challenge that I said I'd take on, notwithstanding.
Coming back to life as a mediator, we've just heard you say that you've conducted thousands of mediations, and you mentioned earlier some of the skills that are required for the best mediators. Have you ever appeared as counsel in a mediation?
It's very interesting, very interesting. I learned very early in the piece that it's very difficult to be a wholesaler and retailer in the same market. If I'm going to be regarded as a successful, highly sought after mediator with a good success rate in resolving matters, if I've then taken on an advocacy role against a firm or other barrister that was in a mediation with me, it would be difficult or more complex, I think, for me to have the distance. Oh, you were involved in that particular matter as an advocate, or you were advising this particular party. And I think it, to some extent, taints your ability to have separation as an independent mediator. You're not. That doesn't mean you can't continue to practice as a lawyer or give advice. And I'm very, very, very loath to give advice to people, particularly where there might be a mediation involved.
Fair enough. But looking at it in a different way, what are the key skills that are required for an advocate in preparing for a mediation? How best do you represent a client at a mediation?
I think, my view about not wanting to advocate if I'm going to run a mediation practice doesn't apply to all people. Our good friend and colleague Tony Nolan is a person that has brilliantly been an advocate as well as an outstanding mediator over many decades, and have a high regard to him. Let me pick perhaps that side of things. If Tony was an advocate for someone like Tony comes into a mediation as an advocate, fully prepared and understanding the brief that he's got, understanding the legal principles that come and arise out of the issues in dispute, but also takes an attitude which I think is fundamental for an advocate in a mediation, and that is, even though the law might be on your side that I'm representing, what is in the holistic view in the best interests of the client? Is it in his interest to run a trial to judgment? Is it in his interest to try and find some commercial way to resolve the matter? And the best advocates in mediation I've found are the latter, the ones that view their client's best interests, and if that demands it be resolved commercially, even if it involves some degree of compromise, then those advocates are the best advocates in mediation.
I agree, and I've interviewed Tony Nolan for this series of podcasts, and during that interview he told me of his interesting experience when he studied advanced mediation skills at Harvard. Beyond your initial training under Professor Tanya Sorden at, I think, Bond University. Have you immersed yourself in a lot of reading or further study about mediation over the years?
Yeah. As a bit of an explorer wanting to try and dig deeper, I have the Getting to Yes scenario
Yes,
through
yes.
Harvard in reading that material. You need to, I think, read as widely as you can to broaden your perspective of the ways of getting through. Like my attitude of floating above the fray of the chaos enables me just to fine tune of where I need to divert the conversation. That learning comes through observing other people, reading and understanding a little bit more about personality, nature, human nature, character, life. You know, understanding the law is pretty easy in any dispute. The law is the law. It might be a version that one person puts, but ultimately a judge or an appeal court, if it gets to that point, they'll either like that view or interpretation, find a point of distinction, and it's either the law is the law. But the human dynamic of I don't believe many people, some people do, I don't believe many people come into a mediation without a view of wanting to try and get it resolved. Yeah, they might want to get it resolved more favourably to them. That's natural, that's human nature. But the skill of a competent, good mediator tapers that expectation early on and engages the parties into a narrative of, well, what is possible and what's not possible, and how do we flex some level of compromise that gets this matter resolved with certainty, and
Sure.
and also that mediates this massive risk that comes if you don't, because it's not only risk of litigation, it's time, money, psychological aggravation of being involved in an unresolved dispute. Like, there's so much negative in not getting it resolved that you try and find ways of getting it resolved.
Sure.
And I think in terms of an advocate as well, Tony is such an advocate, but he's also that way in his understanding as a mediator as well.
Now, of course, any party can walk out of a mediation at any stage, and that can't rebound against you because of the confidentiality of mediation. In your thousands of mediations, have you ever had the experience of a party just standing up and walking out?
One.
Only one.
And it was quite memorable as well, because it was a landlord-tenant dispute, and the landlord came represented with its agent, and during the course of the mediation, the agent got found out as being the culprit, not the tenant, and once the agent got found out, after throwing a few things around the mediation room, left the room. And then the landlord and the tenant got the matter resolved.
Now, Alan, you're coming to the end of your career, perhaps. What's next? You've always been up for a challenge. Where will you get your intellectual stimulation in the years to come?
See, finished is not a word I like. Retirement's not a word I like.
Yes.
Challenge I do like. It's interesting. Always my next steps have been bolts of lightning or opportunities that have come out of the ether. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I would never have gone into the franchise business development that I did in my business life, my commercial business life, other than for a complete left field bolt of lightning, and probably being young enough. If you would have asked me today if that opportunity came up today, would I do it? My answer would be absolutely not. You know, I wouldn't have had the risk appetite that I did at a 25, 26-year-old at the time where I did it. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I'm having, and I'm busy. I finished up last year as a inaugural director of AFCA, which was the Australian Financial Complaints Authority that has been really successful in Australia, and so that's freed up a little bit more time for me to do more mediations and do other things. But you know, I've got 3 wonderful children and 7 wonderful grandchildren at the moment. So in amongst my work, I have regular contact with them, and in fact, my 12-year-old granddaughter, with consent, participated in one mediation with me, and I think she might have what it takes.
Now, Alan, it's been an enormously rich and varied life. Do you think your father would now be proud
So far.
of you? So far, yeah. Is your old man looking down from somewhere and thinking, yeah, the kid came out all right?
Look, I think here's another wonderful anecdote that describes my father and has left me with an incredible source of strength that's got me through some interesting times in my life. When my dad was on his deathbed in Cabrini Hospital, my sister and I were called in, and my dad, in his inimitable, absolutely positive way, already sort of drifting in and out, and you know, he probably had an hour left to live. We were sitting in the room with him, and he couldn't really speak, but you know, my dad opened his eye and opened both of his eyes and winked at my sister and I and put up his finger and said, you know, and it was an indication to him, I'm all right, I know I'm going, I've had a great life, I've had and achieved more as a Holocaust survivor than I could have ever expected, and you'll get on well with life. And then my dad he passed at that point. It was such a poignant moment for my sister and myself. It amplified my dad's strength and courage, and even at the time where he was leaving, he still had a positive message to deliver.
Wow.
So, you know, I could see why my dad was a survivor. Nothing worried my dad in his life, not even at the end.
Now, Alan, it's been a great privilege to have you on this podcast. So, personally and on behalf of the many lawyers that I know, can I thank you for your service to the profession, and more particularly those many thousands of people who found themselves caught up in disputes where you've mediated. I've got no doubt that there are many lawyers and clients out there who are enormously grateful for your search for some common ground. You've saved a lot of people a great deal of pain at trial, so on their behalf, collectively can I say thank you, thank you, thank you. And on that note, we will finish this podcast.
Thank you, Tony. And it's been fun doing this and really enjoyed it. And I think these podcasts are really cameos of people's lives in the profession and really interesting to hear and listen to other people's stories.